Hello, everyone. Good. Let me just go here a second. One little bit over a bit. Hi. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I wanted to make the introduction today because I want to add. It's sad to have to add, but on the other hand, it's special to be able to add another dedication, not dedication, but another schus. The shiur should be l'schus, in addition to Liora Tova Bas Rachamim, also in honor of Chaya Sarah Malka Bas Ruven Yehuda, Sarah Malka Goldberg, who just about a week and a half ago, also a mother of children, so there should be the schus, all the classes going here and onward for these two mothers of Mayim who tragically passed away in the month of Adar. So this should be for their elevation, and we didn't get a chance to add it to the flyer. As Hashem, next week it will be added. As Hashem, Mashiach will be here, and we'll be able to do the shiurim with them physically present over here. Now, today's shiur was dedicated, sponsored by Mrs. Eli Rubin. Thank you, and only brachas to you and your family. All right.
Like I mentioned last time, I was trying to think of something that we could explore in this class, but Hindi is teaching Shar B'Tachan, and I wanted something a little bit more continuous. So after Pesach, I thought we could do a little series on the 3 mitzvahs that are special for women. That's something I'm personally interested in learning a little bit more about. So that I thought we could start after Pesach. But now there's 1 or 2 classes before Pesach. So I thought it made more sense to start that after Pesach and before Pesach to start speaking about Pesach, because it is, my mother probably knows the actual count of days. Do you? Is it 27 or something? No. Something like 27 days till Pesach. And obviously, Pesach requires extensive physical preparation, but it's also a very a time of really powerful energy of freedom. That's the energy of Pesach. And if we could prepare ourselves at least a little bit, cleanse ourselves a little bit to get to that space of freedom, then yeah, it's a good thing to do too. So a little spiritual preparation for Pesach. So Pesach has 3 names that it is called in different places in Torah. So the way it's colloquially called, and people call it, and it's mentioned in the Gemara with the name of Pesach, right? It's actually not in the Torah. It doesn't say Pesach. Torah calls it Chag HaMatzos, right? Chag HaMatzos is the name of Pesach. It is the yentif of the matzah. And then in davening, we also refer to it as Man Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom, right? So these are the 3 names of Pesach. We know names really represent the essence of what something is. Not just a yentif, but anything really, because Hashem created the world through speech, right? And he called something by its name. That means that name encapsulates everything that thing is. It's captures its creation in that name. So similarly, when it comes to Pesach, the names of Pesach capture and represent what Pesach is all about. And in this case, we're going to look at the names in this specific order of sort of what you would call their importance, the importance of the source that calls them the name. Does that make sense? I'll explain more and then maybe it'll make more sense. So in Judaism, something that comes first in general has the strongest, I guess you could say, precedent, and you can't argue with something that comes before you in time. So you can argue with like a contemporary in time, but you can't really argue with something that comes before you in time, because we believe that, the earlier something is, the closer it was to like revelation. The earlier source was the closer it was to revelation as time passed, right? There was Nevuah, and then Nevuah was gone. So now, we rely on Ruach HaKodesh, but you can't really argue with something that comes before it. So that's really why the Gemara, how do they argue in the Gemara? It's constant quotations of either the Mishnah, and then if someone comes in, oh, but the Pesach says this, then the argument's over, right? Because the Mishnah can't argue with a Pesach, because the Pesach is from the Torah or from Tanakh. Well, if it says it in the Constitution, then the law that comes afterwards is you can't argue with that, right? So in general, so the highest source that we listed from these three sources is the Torah, right? So that would be source number one. So I mean, name number one of Pesach is Chag HaMatzos, right? And then we have the name that is called in davening, because davening was instituted by Anshe Pesach Agdela, so they were still in the time of Nevuah. So the name number two would be Zman Perisenu. And then name number three is the name that we call it, that it's called in the Gemara, and also again what people colloquially call it, which would be Pesach. And the reason I'm noting the importance of like the order is because what these names are going to teach us are the steps. The names represent the steps that we need to take to have Pesach. The steps that we need to take to achieve Yetzias Mitzrayim on a personal level are these three names, and the steps need to take place. You can't do step two before step one. It doesn't work, right? So these three steps are: step number one is Chag HaMatzos, step number two is Man Perisenu, and step number three is Pesach. And that's how we get to Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is just like a overall summary. We'll get into detail in a minute. So to understand a bit more, what exactly is it that we're trying to achieve with these steps? What is Yetzias Mitzrayim really? Like, what is Yetzias Mitzrayim? So we all know, like, okay, so we talk about, it's breaking our boundaries, it's going out of our limitations, all of these things, right? Like, we've all heard lots of good shiurim telling us how we should, go break our self-descriptions and all the things that limit us, right? Like that's what Yetzias Mitzrayim is about, is breaking out of our own personal boundaries. But an interesting thing is that in the Torah, Yetzias Mitzrayim is not just really an end to itself. Yetzias Mitzrayim is in order that we become something else, right? So it's not just breaking out of a limitation, but Yetzias Mitzrayim, first of all, leads directly into Matan Torah, right? We went out of Mitzrayim. Why? It keeps on saying, whenever Moshe is talking about taking them out, or even telling Parah, take them out, why? Asher tavdin es Elokim b'harazeh, right? Like that we should go serve Hashem on that mountain, right? So the whole purpose of going out is to get to the mountain, right? We want to get to the mountain. So we're leaving to get to the mountain, which is Shavuot. And interestingly, this is not something we realize necessarily, because we have a set calendar, right? So the calendar was set by Hillel. So we don't have to we don't have a static calendar that's constantly changing. Shavuot could actually be on 2 different days. Shavuot doesn't need to be on Vav Sivan. After the calendar was set, Shavuot will always be on Vav Sivan. But Shavuot is not really determined by a day of the month. How is Shavuot determined? By 49 days after Pesach. So it's not actually a set date in the calendar, it's 49 days after Pesach. Now, in the times when they used to determine the calendar by someone actually seeing the moon, right? And that would change. Oh, is it 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, there's 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, like that whole situation. Is the month going to have 29 days or 30 days? There were times when I believe, I forgot if it's 1 day before or 1 day after, but I'm pretty sure it's 1 day before. I think Shavuot could either have come out on Hay or Vav, depending on how they established that month, right? So 49 days after Pesach could have either been, I think, Hay or Vav, or it's Vav or Zion. I'm not sure which one, but basically it could have been another day. But what is that telling us? It's telling us that Shavuot is created by Pesach, right? Shavuot is actually created by Pesach. You can't take the two apart from each other. So in order to really understand what Pesach is, we also need to understand what Shavuot is. We can't isolate the two. The two are inextricably intertwined. They create each other. So what happened in this process of Pesach leading into Shavuot? What happened is that the Jewish people became what you would call an entirely new nation, like a new nation. We became Am Yisrael, right? Before that, we were an actual nation. It's the birth of our nation. But it's not just that it's the birth of our nation. We became a nation that is not established by regular humanity, but we became a nation that is united, or start that over. That is not united. That is that what drives us and what identifies us is the fact that we are godly. That's what happened from Pesach to Matan. So to expand on this a bit more, in general, it's really hard to define what makes someone Jewish, right? I mean, there's easy ways to define it. You can say if their mother is Jewish, then they're Jewish. But there is the concept of a convert, right? You could convert, and really anyone can convert, right? As long as they go through it. It's a difficult process, and we make it very hard for people, but technically anyone can, right? And so it's not just if your mother was Jewish, right? And we can keep going along as it becomes like a discussion. People are like, oh, is being Jewish? There's the modern question of, are Jews white, right? Or like, there are white Jews, there are non-white Jews, right? Because Judaism is not really an ethnicity. It's not really an ethnicity. You can have Jews from all over the place, and again, you can have a convert. You can say Judaism's a religion, right? But even that is not so simple, because Jews who are not practicing Jews, who completely divorce themselves from religion, we see many cases where, let's say, Hitler killed them anyway, right? That means he didn't define Judaism as a religion. He defined it as sort of an ethnicity. So we see, based on how the world sees us, and also how we see ourselves, we see Judaism, it's not so simple to say, oh, it's just a nation, or it doesn't really matter if we don't all come from one place anymore, right? We don't, it's kind of complex to define what being a Jew is. And so what being a Jew is, this notion of being a Jew is what happened. Like you can't really define it in one word. It is this process from Pesach to Shavuot. That's really what being a Jew is. It's more than just, again, it's more than being religious. It's more than being a religion. It's more than just like, oh, how did the nation form? Because you can go, it's very interesting to study like, oh, when nations began and how, like, you know, this group merged with this group. And if you learn like early history, it can be really fascinating. You know how in Europe, all the different like tribes, there's the German tribes and the French tribes, and how they all sort of just like took over different areas. It can be really fascinating just to discuss nation building. But the Jewish people didn't build as a nation in that way. We didn't become a nation in that way. It happened, you see us from Shrine to Matan, that's when we became a nation. So how does a nation like this be, like, what does it mean that we became a nation? What are we as a nation? And what are the steps we can take to integrate this into our lives? Like, what does that mean on a personal level? Okay, so in order to understand what these steps are, what is it to become a nation? What does it mean to be a nation that's built on Torah and on godliness? We're going to have a mashal to understand this. And the mashal is learning something new. Okay, so the interesting thing, the sort of blessing of living in the time that we live in right now, it's like really quite incredible if you think about it. Information is like totally accessible, right? Like anything you want to know, you can find out in a second. And it's like, it's really crazy. Like it never used to be that way, right? People had to go to the library to find the specific book and find the specific page of the encyclopedia if you wanted to like find out a random fact, right? But today, you know, it's like if you're discussing something on Shabbos, it's like, remind me to look it up after Shabbos because like I need that piece of information to prove my point. But like all information is super accessible, right? So when I'm saying learning something new, I'm talking about anything you can Google. We're not talking about things you can Google, okay? Learning something new means learning something that my brain cannot, in its current state and capacity, cannot figure out on its own, right? So it's not something that I can just, I mean, okay, so actually, maybe I won't just say you can't just Google, because there are things you can Google and you'll read them and you absolutely won't understand them, right? So like I can Google string theory, and I'll read it and it won't help me, right? So like I'll read it and I'll read the words and like my mind will process the words, but I won't actually understand. So you could potentially Google it, but you won't be able to understand it on your own. That's what we mean by learning something new. Learning something that my brain in its current state cannot understand on its own, okay? And what do we need in that situation? That's really where a teacher comes in, right? Until the point of just information that I can understand with my own brain, I don't need a teacher. But I need a teacher when it's something that I can't access on my own. And that means that this teacher is someone who does have this knowledge, right? Their brain is in a more developed state, and therefore they do have this knowledge. And through their knowledge, they're able to communicate it to me. So what is the process of how this teacher takes something that I couldn't have done on my own and then communicates it to me? How does this work? So I'd say for me personally, I think the category that I would need a teacher the most is when it comes to, let's say, like math. I mean, obviously with everything, there are areas that you need a teacher. But for me, I resonate very strongly with like math. I can't figure it out on my own, right? So what are the steps that I need to take to learn this math? So the first step that Chassidus teaches us, that the first step of learning, we actually touched on this in the last class, the first step to really understanding something new is letting go of everything else you had before. And that means information-wise, opening my mind up and saying, I'm not going to rely on my second grade mathematics level, right? And it's really hard. It's because like I could be like stuck in this space of what I learned in second grade, what I learned in elementary school, right? So I have to let go of all that previous information. And when I'm talking about letting go, not only do I have to let go of the information, I also have to let go of those definitions that I've created with myself that I'm not a math person. That's also part of what I'm letting go of, right? So I'm not just letting go of my previous knowledge, I'm also letting go of certain what would the word be? Negative self-talk that I have with myself about what I'm able to do, what I'm not able to do. I need to come into this room in a state of total openness. One time when I was in my note, we had a teacher was traveling, a teacher that taught us every day. So we had a substitute come in, and we never actually heard about him before. Like we didn't know who he was, and he came in, and we were looking forward, new teacher, something different, a little change. So he starts talking. He starts teaching a class, and literally not a single person understood a word he was saying. He was teaching like, I don't know, it was like Kabbalah, but he was saying it was just like really like in English, but like things that we totally didn't understand. Like he was just talking right over our heads, the entire class. And so at the end we were like, okay, did anyone get that? No one really got it. Okay. And we knew this was this was a class we had almost every day. So we're like, okay, we're gonna have to deal with him again tomorrow. The next day he came in and he taught like one of the best classes any of us had ever heard. Literally, it was an amazing class. It was like deep and practical, and everyone was like so excited and asking him a million questions. And like it continued this way where he was teaching these incredible classes. And at one point he mentioned in passing, anytime he goes to teach somewhere, the first class he teaches makes no sense. The first class he teaches, he's not trying to reach the student. And what is the purpose in that? The purpose in that is to bring his students to the state of bittul. So what is he doing? He's trying to create a receptiveness in the students. Now, obviously, if you do this in a 5th grade classroom, it's going to backfire on you because you're just going to totally lose them. He was teaching adults who were, had enough, first of all, just enough respect that the next time they actually listened to what he was going to say, et cetera, et cetera. It worked for him. I don't know if I would do it, but it was very, very interesting to me, how really what he did was he opened us up in a way that we would not have been able to open us up in the first place. We emphasize so much, I know for myself, when I'm trying to teach, what's my biggest goal is to make something practical. That's make it real, make it relevant, make it something that someone can live with. But if you just start in that space of practicality, then there isn't that bittul. Right? Because I feel that I know it already and it resonates with me. So it's and I want that resonance. That's the goal in the end, right? But if you start with that resonance, even from the perspective of the student, if I'm just feeling oh, this all resonates so clearly with me, what happens is that I think I know it already. And it's true, the reason it resonates is because someplace in my soul, this idea rings true. But to really open myself up to learning something, I need to first let go. First there can't be the resonance almost, right? First it can't be about me. First I need to just let go of everything and open myself up. And that's, that's why there's a bunch of in the Gemara it says, when the teacher walks into the classroom, the students should be trembling with fear. What does that mean, trembling with fear? Then the point is not to that we should be terrified to learn, but that we need to let go of everything else, because when we're in that space of everything else, we're just sticking things into something that already exists. If you want to learn something new, you first have to let go. That's the step number 1 in learning, is the bittul, letting go. But then step number 2, like I said before, is you do want that resonance in the end, right? So in the beginning, you want the student to be open, to be receptive, to not necessarily understand. But then as they're listening to what the teacher is saying and they're hearing the teacher's information, the goal of the teacher is to then have the student play with the idea and be able to apply the idea themselves. I think you see this a lot in skill building, right? So when you're first attempting a new skill, you automatically have that feeling of bittul because you don't know how to do it before, right? If we turn this into, maybe I'm making an assumption. If we turn this, but forgive me if I am, but if we turn this into a Gemara class and I had you all set up with chavrusas and opening a page of Gemara, chances are we would all feel a lot of bittul because most of us probably are not equipped to learn a page of Gemara. We don't have those skills. If anyone does, I would like to set up a chavrusa with you. We can start, but we don't have those skills we would have this bittul, right? We would feel kind of powerless. We would feel in a sense oh, I'm nothing when it comes to learning this, right? But then, if we worked with our dictionaries and after we attempted to break this apart, we then had a class where the teacher taught us how to break down the page. And then the next day we came back and tried again, right? And if we kept on going through that very harrowing process of learning, right, of learning something new, of truly learning something new, eventually what would happen? We would be able to do it on our own, right? I would be able to open the page and I'd be able to do it on my own, and I would start to trust myself, right? I wouldn't have to stay in that space of bittul where I know nothing. I would be able to start to trust myself. I'd be able to apply information I have in the past, right? Which is necessary at a certain point, right? In the beginning, it's not necessary, but into the process, it is necessary. I can pull on information I have from the past to apply to the page, right? And the learning then, what happens to the learning? Once you reach that state, it becomes so enjoyable, right? The beginning stage is not so enjoyable. And that's why a lot of people just don't do it. Don't attempt to learn new things because the beginning is so hard and it brings you down and you feel again, you're in that state of bittul, you feel kind of crushed, I can't do this. But then once you break past that point and you start figuring it out for yourself, there's no feeling like that, really figuring something out with your mind on your own is an amazing feeling. And that is the second step in learning. Step number 1, I have to let go of myself, hear what the thing is for real, for what it is. Step number 2, bring myself back in. And when I bring myself back in, that's when it like integrates with me, right? And that's when I have all this joy. That's when it becomes joyous, is when I start to bring myself back into the picture and I integrate it into my own mind, right? And also it opens up like a whole new world to me. I can then go on. I'm not just stuck with what the teacher is teaching me. I can then take that ability and apply it to endless scenarios, right? And that's, again, that's what I think the goal of a teacher should be, is not that the student should walk out with this information, but that they should walk out able to further educate themselves and so many other things, right? And so what is the final, like sort of, I guess you could say it's not really the final step, but you would say the result of step 1 and step 2 is that now my brain is a different brain than it was when I first started. I am no longer the same mind that I was when I started. I have been taken to an entirely new intellectual plane. That's like a successful learning, as I've been taken to a space that I could not have gone on my own. I couldn't have, however much I Googled and read about the subject, I could not have done it on my own. The teacher guided me through their wisdom. Their brain was up here, my brain was here. We met sort of in the middle, right? Through my bittul and them opening me up, and then me reintroducing my own brain into the picture, I'm now in a new space. And it says, even that, you know, if a student studies with a teacher long enough, at a certain point in the Gemara, it gives a very long number, 40 years. If you're a student of a specific Rebbe for 40 years, then Kaya Daite Rebbe. That like the student is now considered, they could speak for the Rebbe. They're in that same space, right? Because they've fully integrated themselves into that space. And that is the process of learning something new. And now, this is everything we just said until now. This is all, we have time to go a little longer. Yeah. Okay. So this is all a mushal for what we said before, what Pesach is really all about. Pesach is all about becoming this new nation, this like sort of undefinable nation. If we go through a similar 3-step process, and it's related into the name of Pesach, the names of Pesach. What did we say name number 1 is? Chag HaMatzos. What's the point of matzah? Flat, right? Matzah represents absolute humility as opposed to chametz, which is being puffed up and haughty. There's matzah, which is flat and sort of very like unexciting and dry and crumbly, right? But like, what is this matzah? This matzah is letting go of ego. So before I can begin to become someone new, I need to let go of who I was before. Because if I'm just working off of who I was before, then it's just that person just shined up and looking better, right? We can do that. Like there's a lot of work that we can do on the person that we already are. And there's so much space for that, right? There's space to develop and shine the person who I already was. And like refine the person who I already am. But over here, we're not talking about refining the person we already are. We're talking about becoming someone new, like really like redefining ourselves. Step number 1 is letting go of our previous identity. And that's an extremely difficult step. It means letting go of everything that we're comfortable with. And it's interesting because in all the Chassidus that speaks about Pesach, you would think a lot of it is like about, you know, letting go of the chametz of the Yetzer Hara. A lot of it is even in a religious sense. This is like the only story I ever tell, but like I tell it all the time. So it's just like a story that really, I resonated with very strongly. A teacher told this to me many years ago, and it's just like, it's such a powerful story. So there was I don't know which Rebbe it was, because I don't know if it's even a true story, but there's a hypothetical Rebbe, and he's at a wedding of one of his Hasidim. And at a Hasidic wedding, there is a badchen. And he's like, there's different roles of the badchen. He makes jokes, he runs the mitzvahs, right? There's all these different roles of the badchen. So there's this badchen, and part of his sort of being Mesameach the Chassan and Kala, he is putting on like a whole show. He's impersonating what happens at this Hasidic court, like at a, you know, like in this court. So it's like, it's funny when you see, when you play up what goes on a regular basis in like your show, right? So the guy is doing his whole show, And he's showing davening, and he's davening with like all the kavana that the Rebbe normally davens with, right? And he's acting first as the Rebbe, and he's davening with all the movements and the whole thing, the whole show. And at a certain point, he turns around and he sees the Rebbe sitting there, and he's crying and crying. And of course, the guy freaks out. He's like, he runs over, apologizes. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. That, like I wasn't making fun. It's a very holy thing. And the Rebbe tells him, no, it's not you. It's okay. It's just as I was watching you, you're putting on such a good show. And you were davening with all the movements that I do myself. I was thinking to myself, when I daven, am I just copying myself? And this story, it's like in our Judaism too, like even in the good things we do, are we just copying ourselves? Like at one point, I was this person who did this, and therefore I'll just continue and be that person. Or other people see me this way, so I'll fill the expectations that people expect of me, right? But am I really there? Like, is it me, or is it me just copying me, right? And this applies this applies to us on a religious level, or applies in a completely divorced it totally from religious context as well. Like all the parts of my life, am I just like, we come up with all like these wonderful definitions for ourselves, these roles that we play, and then we play them and we fill them, right? And what is matzah? What is Chag HaMatzah is just like crumble the matzah, right? Just like crumble the definitions, crumble everything that was before, go into the space of letting go of who was here entirely. That's Chag HaMatzah, is the step of bittul. And then what happens after that? But we can't stay. You can't stay in the space of bittul. It's actually, you can't live in a state of bittul. You can't live in a state of being definitionless, because then you can actually have like the motivation to actually do something. There actually is a role for having like ego and definitions for ourselves, because that's what drives us to actually get things done, right? So if we would just stay in the state of bittul, like, okay, I'm one with God and I'm sitting here meditating, that's beautiful, but like, that's not the point, right? So after we have the bittul, the point is not to stay there, but then to bring myself into the picture. Only now I can do it on a whole different level than where I was before. If I was just building on my past definitions, then I'm just stuck right over here, and I'm not someone new. If I let go of myself and then redefine myself, I reintroduce myself into the picture after letting go of myself, because I need that self to do things, to have a drive, to have motivation, right? But now the definition can be entirely different than the definition I had before, right? It can be on a whole new plane. And this is the idea of Zman Cherusin, time of our freedom. Because freedom is very hard to define. Like, there are people who say, oh, if no one's telling me what to do, then I'm free, right? But, just by nature, I think especially like the world in its current state, just even like the title, like on social media, there are influencers, right? What does that mean? What is like the whole goal of like this influencer is to like be that person in the back of your brain convincing you to do things and buy things, mostly buy things, but like convincing you to buy things, like that's what they're doing. So do I have a free choice when I'm buying things? Very, 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 very little free choice in the world, in the current state. Like maybe 500 years ago when people went to the market to, buy things, there were trends, but there wasn't like the way it is right now with like the accessibility of the trends, how fast they change and how much in our face they are, right? Like it's even like just like the whole, like you get into like the psychology of marketing, it's crazy, like you have a happy family sitting around eating this thing, and like in our mind we think, oh, I'm gonna have that happiness and that family and that lack of loneliness if I buy these pancakes. It's really that's the way it works, and like it really convinces us. So does that mean that I'm free when I'm making these choices? Not really, right? Like it's very difficult to get to that space or like, where is it that I actually have freedom in my life? And where is it that I am the one who is in charge? It's only when I really can, access like the deepest parts of myself. And as a Jew, what is at the core of my being? As a Jew, what is at the core of my being is my soul. And what is at the core of my soul is Hashem, right? Like godly energy is the core of my soul. So when I am acting in line with my deepest self, and I like get in touch with my deepest, truest self, that means that I am being free, right? When I'm acting in line with that godliness, that means I'm not hearing the outside noises. That means the choices I'm making are truly free choices. So it's like, it's kind of hard to understand this. Like, people saying, oh, if you have to follow all the rules that God tells you, you're not free, right? But at the end of the day, everyone is following rules. Literally everyone. No one is not following rules. The question is, where are these rules coming from? Right? I think I even heard it like, I think it was, I'm not sure of the source of this, but I heard someone say that following what Hashem tells me allows me to transcend the rule of my very basic and non-intelligent physical whims and desires. Right? So you can say, oh, you're being a slave to religion, or you can say, oh, I'm a slave to my body. Right? Like I'm a slave to my body, and I don't think any human being wants to say that their body is the deepest part of themselves, right? But there are people who are slaves to their bodies, right? And it's like really fascinating to see, and this is, I think, a really good example for this. What does it mean that there's an element of freedom in this? There can be someone who, and this doesn't happen every time, but I think the fact that it can happen is a proof of this rule. You can have someone who is a smoker who needs to smoke once an hour, and what happens on Shabbos? They don't need to smoke, or they do need to smoke, but they manage not to. That's a pretty crazy thing, because like smoking is proven to be, it's addictive. It's like it's a chemical reality. But what does it mean? It means that I have the freedom and ability to transcend this extremely strong, overpowering addiction. And I think we all experience this with food. I need to eat this right now, but if I'm fleishigs, I'll somehow be able to not eat it. Like how, and for a lot of people, it doesn't even cross our minds. Or I'm always on my phone, but on Shabbos, again, it doesn't even cross my mind. Right? What is that? It's a certain element of freedom where I am in line, where I understand that this is in line with my deepest self, and I'm satisfied with that. And that gives me like this like state of peace and happiness, because I'm not fighting against something. It's in tune with who I am, and it transcends all these other labels and physical and physical needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just getting into the core of who I am. And so again, there's an I here. It's not that there's no person here. It's not that I'm identityless or have no sense of self. I have a sense of self, but that sense of self is in line with God. And that means that I am, and then I'm able to do like all these crazy things because Hashem is unlimited. And so that brings us to number 3. What's number 3? Name number 3. Name number 3 is Pesach. Where does Pesach come from? The name Pesach come from? It comes from the language actually of jumping, right? That Hashem jumped over the Jewish doors to avoid killing the Jewish firstborns. So why are we saying this language of jumping? Is because you can grow in a steady fashion, going from step to step, right? Like it's possible to have that sort of growth, and that sort of growth is important. But then there's that growth where you take a leap, where, like we said before, you are able to understand something your brain could not have understood on its own, or you become a person you could not have become if you allowed that pre-existing identity to stay intact, right? And that's what happens when we let go of our old selves and we reunite with our deepest, truest self, and we allow that to express itself. And then we jump up and we become an entirely new person, or in the case of Pesach, we became an entirely new nation, to the extent that we were then able to receive the Torah, which marriages heaven and earth, which is a whole another discussion. When we get closer to Pesach, we can talk about. But yeah, that is the 3-step process of Pesach. Matzah, making myself flat. Uniting with the deepest, freest part of myself, and then I become someone entirely new. So yeah, that's Pesach.